Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought we'd create a nice simple card together. I've actually come upstairs and it's so strange because normally I've got my fan on and I've had to put the heating on. I'm so cold, which is a novelty because I've been so hot for so long, but it's quite cold. Anyway, we're going to create a simple card. So I've got a piece of Pink Frog Smooth Card 300 GSM and it's 4 by 6 inches. This is the piece that I'm going to be working on. I've then created a mat 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 and I have a card blank 5 by 7. So we'll just move those out of the way somewhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with the stamp set Take Flight TE9. I'm just going to take this stamp set, and you know, every time I forget I stamp an ink pad, and it's always the Versamark watermark. I always forget to pick that stamp set out. I don't know why. And I've just noticed a pencil in there. I'll have to use that. So I'm going to, I think we'll put this on an acrylic block just so we get a pretty good print. So let's just take this, and you can see the design on here. You can see all the detail, the beautiful detail on there. And this one works beautifully with the moth stamp that I've bought out just this last week. And it goes perfectly with the clocks that are on the light bulbs as well. So they all work together beautifully. So I'm going to take my Versamark watermark stamp pad, in other words, a sticky ink pad. So whatever sticky ink pad you like to use. So I'm using my Versamark. Now, if you're using your Versamark, make sure your stamp has not got any wet ink on there, because if it's got any wet ink on there, it'll transfer to your Versamark stamp pad. And you can see I'm giving this a really good inking, just like I would if I was using the Nocturne ink. And no different, same every time. Always give that ink time to just absorb onto the surface of the card. Don't be in too much of a rush to lift that ink up and expect to have a wonderful image without giving it time to transfer. I bet you can't guess what else I forgot to get, which I do it every time. Copier paper. Absolutely every time I do it. So just give this a little bit of time just to sort of make an impression on the surface of the card. You've got lots of detail on there, so just give that time, and always keep 2 fingers on your stamp. Don't sort of move your fingers off there, because it'll rock if you don't have some stability on the stamp. So let's lift that up. It's great for camera work and photography because you can't see a thing. So we'll just grab that piece of copier paper, and I ordered some white embossing powder. I didn't quite realise how small the bottles were, but there you go. So I've got some Wow opaque bright white. Any white embossing powder is absolutely fine, whatever you prefer to use. Let's just sprinkle that with that embossing powder. Now, the top tip is I haven't touched this card very much, but if you've got a piece of card that you've had in your collection, you know, maybe you've cut your card blanks well in advance. If you've sort of had, you know, you've had your fingers on the card, just rub over with an anti-static bag. It's just a sort of good practice to get into. So we'll just heat that up. We'll just heat the heat tool up, because there's no point going on to this while the heat tool is wafting cool air, because it just won't do anything. We'll just give that a little bit of time to heat up. We'll actually move the Versamark so that we're not actually heating the ink pad, and then we'll heat our stamped image. And what we're going to do now is just to melt that embossing powder so that we have a glossy image. Just tilting it slightly because with the shadow from my arms and everything, it's very difficult to see the embossing powder turning. So you can see I'm just tilting the card slightly just so I can see exactly what I've got. I'm just going to move the card because once it's melted you don't want to heat that again because you don't want it to go back to matte. You want that glossy finish. I think I've got that all there. So I just have to tilt that slightly just so that we can see what we're doing, and just so that you can see that. You can see the glossy image on there. I'm just going to give that a couple of seconds just to cool down because I don't want to work on there whilst it's warm. And then I'm going to use one of my snippet stencils. So just deciding which one. I think we'll use the thinner one, which is Snippet Stencil SS9. So we're going to use SS9, the actual thinner one that reminds me of sort of the vintage shape you used to get with the old-fashioned sort of Christmas lights. It reminds me of that one. Now the stencils have got the name on there, which you can just rub over with black ink and that will highlight the details. So if I just grab some cut and dry foam and just show you that. You can rub directly over with your ink pad if you wish, but if I take there it is, and just add some of the ink over there. If you go directly over with your ink pad, when you wipe over, a lot more ink stays in the crevices. There we go. The ink that's on this is dry, the ink that's on the outside, if you find that doesn't come off, just use some hand sanitizer or whatever you want to use. But you can see then it highlights the name for you. So it says SS9 on there, just so that you know that the stencils do have the name on there. It does help if you've got sort of a white that is not bone dry. There we go. Right, so I'm going to take this stencil and I'm going to use it this way, just deciding sort of around about there. Do you like how I can't make my mind up? So now I just need some low tack tape. And you need to make sure that your tape is low tack. Whichever tape you're using, I'm just going to de-tack that a little bit. Let me just place that straight so you can see. I'm just going to place that on there. Let's take some scissors and just cut that away across the bottom, because these are the areas you don't want to add ink where you don't want it. You want it sort of specifically in the aperture. So you're just making sure that you keep that in the aperture. Now you see that I didn't de-tack that because it's going straight onto the non-stick craft sheet. So there's no need to de-tack that. So what I'm going to do now is add some colour to the light bulb. So I'm going to start with the mustard seeds, and I've got my ink blending brushes, which you can get on my website. So I'm going to take the ink blending brushes, and if I hold the brush further down, I can then pick up more ink. If I hold it further up, you pick up less ink. It's just wherever you want to hold it. So I'm going to add a little touch of mustard seed. And what I'm going to do is just add the colour here and there randomly. So I've got a nice sort of touch of mustard seed there. I'm then going to take a little touch of the spiced marmalade. So let's take a little bit of spiced marmalade. And you will see that the embossing resists the ink. I'm then going to take some candied apple. So let's take a little bit of the candied apple. And because I'm holding that brush a little bit further down, I'm laying the ink on quite thickly, quite richly. So then I'm going to take seedless preserves. And let's add a little bit of that seedless preserves. Now I want a little bit more of a blend. So I'm going to go back. There's plenty of ink on there, so I can use the mustard seed. I'm then going to use the orange, which is spiced marmalade. Then some of the red, which is candied apple. And then we'll go back with the seedless preserves. Just blends that a little bit more. Let's just have a little bit more of the orange, maybe a little bit more of the yellow there. Okay, so let's just move these all out of the way. Let's grab another piece of card. So I'm just grabbing another piece of 4 by 6 inch card because we'll have ink on the stencil and it seems a shame to waste that ink. I never remember which one went on first. So we'll just save this low tack tape for now, should you want to reuse it. Disadvantage of having long nails, you can't actually pull things off. There we go. Don't sort of snatch your low tack tape. Just be aware it's holding that card down, so don't sort of snatch at the low tack tape. There we go. So we have our little light bulb on there. Let's just move that out of the way, and then we can just spritz this. So we'll just spritz the stencil. So I've spritzed it with water, and then we'll just add that just on one side here. And then if we grab some kitchen towel, that will just absorb any moisture, any excess moisture that might flood through the stencil. So just give that a few moments just to, again, as always, just sort of grab the card. And not much water there, so that's fine. Let's lift that up. And then you've got part of a card. Now what I can do is, you see this is wet here, so if you like you can then just take that wet colour. So let's just add that wet colour. So you can just take the colour that's a little bit wet and just drag it to the edge. And then you've got the ink that was on the outside, and you've got the sort of what's the word? The colour that's on the outside. And you see, that instantly gives me an idea, because I can add more of this colour now, sort of watered down to the outside. So you've got a start of a project there. Let's go back to our project. So never sort of discard some ink that's on your stencil, because you'll be surprised where it can lead to another project. So I'm just going to add a little sort of touch of water to my kitchen towel, and then I'm just going to dab, and just to prove that you're lifting some of the ink, can you see? It resists that embossing. Now don't go in with the same area of your kitchen roll. Move to a clean area, because you don't want to place that ink back on again. So I'm just dabbing, and if you dab, you sort of lift some and not other areas. And you don't need a gallon of water. You don't need to rub, you can just dab, just so that you get that pop of that white. There we go. Lovely. Doesn't that look effective? Just in its own, there's a little blob of water there. But doesn't that look effective? Just with a stencil and the background stamp, it looks effective. Excuse me. But you can see some areas have not quite lifted. So you can go back at any stage and just, again, add a touch of water. And you can just lift. Just beautiful. It looks so, so lovely. So I'm just going to grab my Inktense pencil. Let's grab a touch of that. So I'm going to add a little touch of Inktense pencil around this edge. Now, obviously, I've got that Distress Oxide ink right up to the edge, so I just need to be careful how much water I add to this. So a little bit of, so I'll just use a fine brush, again making sure that it's not too wet, and I'm going up to the Inktense pencil, not starting here. I'm sort of moving the water up to it, and then I'll drag it out. But I'm making sure that there's not too much water. So just dragging a little bit of that Inktense pencil out. Now, if you don't use too much water, you won't drag too much of the colour out from the light bulb. There we go. So let's just wipe this up. I just love that. You see, you could even cut that out and add it as well if you wanted to, but I like that for another card because I just think that looks fab. So we'll use that for another card. I just think it'll work really well. So then I'm going to grab, is it in this one? I always forget which stamp set's in which. There we go. So I'm going to use the TE27, the insect stamp of the moth. Let's just remove the plastic. I try to leave the plastic inside here because then I'm not searching for it, which I spend a lot of time doing. So I'm just going to take the moth, and I just want the moth on its own rather than anything else. So we'll just grab another of the acrylic blocks, and I'm going to stamp in grey. So we need a scrap of card. And we'll use our morning mist. Let's have a look what it looks like in the morning mist. And again, like I do with any stamping, lots of tapping, just so that we can get a good image. So just stamp this onto scrap card. And just give, as always, just give that time just to absorb onto the surface of the card. You don't have to press really hard, there's no need for that. And just give that a little bit of time. Just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, just so that you can see the image. And I'm going to take the little insect and use that. I'm just going to dry that a little bit. I will blend with ink, but what I'm going to do is, I think I just want that. I'm going to take this circle here, and then I'm not leaving any white gap. I'm cutting right to the edge. I've got my scissors stuck in the card then. Right to the edge of the card. So you can cut the moth out in its own right, just as the moth, or you can add parts of the background from the stamp. And I love just having a little play with the composition. So this will go here like so. But I want to add a little bit of dimension to our moth. So I'm going to stamp the moth again in the grey, but obviously this time I just need the moth. Just give that a really good tap with your ink pad. I do love how they all work together, she says as she nearly drops the acrylic block. The amount of times I do that, drop the acrylic block, do that so many times because I'm thinking about the next step and oh, I could do this, or oh, I could do that, and then I forget that I'm holding my stamp and I just flick it all over the place because I'm good like that. We'll give this a dry in a second. So now we'll cut our moth out. Again, I'm going right to the edge just to cut that out. And it works beautifully with all the previous releases and with the florals. It works so nicely. And you can see I'm trying to keep my fingers away from the ink, just so that we don't smudge that. There we go. So then I can, when I colour this a bit, I can have this with a little bit of dimension and it'll look quite nice. So let's add a little bit of colour to this. I'm not going to sort of colour it precisely, just with my colours that I've used before. So let's grab a little bit of the mustard seed, a little bit of the candied apple, because them two together will make the orange anyway, and then a little bit of the seedless preserves. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that water, and I'm going to start with the seedless preserves, just so that it's got a little bit of that darker colour just on here. So just add a little bit of the seedless preserves. Just give that, look how strong that colour is. Just pick up a little bit of the candied apple. And I'm hardly touching that, I'm just touching a little bit. Because obviously we've only got small spaces, we don't want to overpower with the colour. So I'm just taking a little bit of that candied apple. And I'm just doodling it on really, I'm not sort of doing anything specific. Now I just want to make sure I've got that yellow rather than any other colour. Let's just add the yellow, just because the yellow will give that vibrancy. And it's very loose colouring in the sense of the word. Let's just clean that. I can't get over. I think I've not got much on there and it's surprising. So I'm just going to take the seedless preserves again. Let's just add a little bit just to here. Just a little bit more. So I'm just adding a little bit more depth of that colour. Just adding a little bit more of that colour. I'll then go into the candied apple, and I'm just going to add the candied apple. Again, very sort of loosely coloured, just so that it's on there. Now we'll just add a little bit of yellow here. So it's just sort of very loosely coloured. So let's just wipe up all these watery bits and pieces. Just going to give this a little bit of a dry. You can tell when I'm engrossed because I just lose myself. So I'm just adding a little bit more darkness. Because I've now dried it, I can sort of build the depth, the layers. And sometimes I am asked, why do you layer so much? And that's because it gives the depth of the colour, and for me it's just all worthwhile. So let's just all wipe that up. You could have spritzed that with water and then mopped that up onto another background quite easily, rather than waste that. So you could quite easily sort of mop that up, and just so you can see it's very loosely coloured, just so that you can see that. And what I will do is add this on top of here. What I just want to decide is whether I want a little bit of colour just on this circle here. So before we add that, I'm going to add a little bit. So why did I mop all that colour up? So I'm just going to add a little bit. This is what I do. Decide that I do want more of the colour. So I'm going to take a little bit of the seedless preserves. And as my water runs out, I'm just going to pick up a little bit more just to move that just a touch more. There we go. Let's take a little bit of the candied apple. Pick up a little bit of the candied apple. Again, add the candied apple. And that's a very sort of watered down colour. So we'll dry that and we'll add the colour again. Let's go back to the seedless preserves so that we've got this here, and add a little bit more depth of that colour. And you want a card that allows you to move the colour. I think I need a little bit more red. So a little bit more of the candied apple. And again, I'm layering the colour just to give me a little bit more depth. And I'm going to get better depth if I dry the colour and then lay it again. So let's just give that a dry. And then if I come in again, I'm just going to knock them all over the place. If I come in again with the seedless preserves, just give a little bit more darkness. And now it really lays the colour down thicker and richer. We'll go to the red now. And this layers on the top now because the layers underneath are dry. So let's just use some clean water, and then we'll pick up the mustard seed and just go into the other colour, which will create the orange. That's it. Just rinse that a little bit, just so that it's dry. Again, you could mop that little bit of colour up onto another card. You'd be surprised what your background looks like if you keep just dabbing up little bits of colour. You get really good backgrounds. So just give that a dry. Give the little moth a dry as well. Mainly because if I want to add touches of white, there's no way I'm going to be able to add those touches of white if it's wet. So let's just take my Posca pen, and really it needs to be a little bit drier just to add these touches of white, but you can still go back in and add those afterwards, but you would sort of wait a while just to add your touches of white, just so that that is completely dry, but we can do that. So I'm going to add my sort of circular piece here. And I'm going to give it some dimension. If you don't want to give dimension, you can just glue that completely flat. I quite like having a little bit of the dimension. Let's move that bit of glue. So we'll add this here. I'm not going to flatten that down too much. Hold those wings up and just add a little bit of dimension to the centre. Just to hold that up a little bit. There we go. And obviously, once that's completely solid and dried completely, it won't move. And then you can go back in and add touches of white should you wish. I'm then going to take, let's just put the little moth, not exactly little, but we'll just place that back just so that I don't get in too much of a mess. I'm then going to take one of the florals from Jar of Wishes TE26. So I'm just going to take this floral here, like so. I think that scrap of paper has had it. Grab another scrap of card. Just so that we can stamp our design on there. Now I'm just going to get the shape so that I can colour it however I want. I mean, you can draw in the stem anyway, but I'm going to use sand dune. And what I'm going to do is, doesn't matter about the stem, I'm just sort of going to go around the shape of the floral. Let's see what that gives us. There we go. I've got the shape of the floral in the sand dune. Now I could have just inked it with the colours from the oxides, but because I've got this sand dune on here now, I've automatically got a dark edge. But can you see, it's only sort of like the outline. So we'll grab our little brush again, take the colours again. So the seedless preserves, the mustard seed and the candied apple. So we'll take those again. Have a little bit of kitchen roll on one side. Then we'll pick up the seedless preserves because I want the darkest colour around here. And I'm just going to drag that out until the colour really fades. So there's hardly anything left. Perfect. I'm then going to go to the second colour, my candied apple, like you would with your pencils, dark, medium, light. I'm just going to go in with the candied apple, like so. And then I'll go to the mustard seed. And let me just show you that. So now we've got no depth, it's just very light in colour. So if we give that a dry, that colour's then dry and we can layer more colour on the top to give that more depth. Because that's exactly what we want. We want to sort of, or I want anyway, you might want something different from your florals. So I'm just building up the depth just on there. There we go. So let's use a little bit of water just to take that off. And then we'll go to the candied apple. Then we'll come in with the candied apple and go down into your previous colour like you would if you were using pencils. So I'm going to go to the mustard seed. And again, I'm coming into the candied apple, which will create orange tones. And then I'm going to give that a dry again. I'm going to add more of that candied apple. Let's grab a little bit of water. And now it's layering even more. So you get more depth of that colour. It's a piece of glue here. So let's grab some clean water and then go to the, I always keep forgetting this coloured mustard seed. So go to the mustard seed and go right down into those red tones. Okay, let's give that a clean again. I'm going to go back to the seedless preserves and I'm going to come right down at the bottom just to bring in even more of that depth. We'll come down into our stem. But if you've got card that will allow you to move that colour, that's exactly what you want. So let's grab a little bit more water. Let's grab a little bit of the candied apple. Just add a little bit of that to the stem. And we'll pick up a little bit of the yellow and just add that to the stem, just so that you've got those colours on there. Let's give that a dry. And then I'm just going to get rid of what I call the stained water, and we'll just have some clean water. Well, it's not exactly clean because I've gone straight into the colour. Clean water is a good idea, that's better. So I'm going to come back to more mustard seed and just add another layer of the mustard seed. No different than if you were doing your pencil work, just adding layers. Let's just move that out of the way. Now we've got all this colour on here. So again, like I was saying before, you could literally sort of mop the colour up. And if you did this several times, you'll be surprised what sort of backgrounds you really get. So you can spritz that with water so it all moves. And you can see I've not put the orange on there because I don't want to create brown. Just drying it a little bit so that I can layer the other colour. But just that little bit of ink, just look at the background that you get. So just be aware that, you know, you don't want to sort of necessarily waste your ink that's on your non-stick craft sheet. Just make sure that you pick that up because you can create other backgrounds that go with your mop-up pieces. So let's just, and I would continue with that, just adding that layer of ink from the non-stick craft sheet because it really adds something. Let's not knock that. There we go. So then I'm going to dry this little floral. Then we'll cut it out because it always looks better when it's sort of standalone rather than sitting just there. So this time I'm going to leave a very subtle white border. just so that that pops a little bit more. Just cut that round there. And when you're adding white to your oxides, again, I would sort of layer that colour. So what I mean is I'd add the white touches and then I'd come back and do it again, just so that you add layers of the white, or you can use white paint. I'm going to bend the edge a little bit just to give that a little bit more life, and then I'm just going to tuck this behind here like so, and then I'm just going to keep nudging. Probably better if you waited until the rest of it was dry, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to add some of this adhesive to the stem, because then I can add some pin flare, just so that this grabs hold of somewhere on the page. I'll add a little bit of that pin flare. Little dollop of pin flare. Like so. Bring that in a bit. And because it's got depth, it automatically creates a shadow. I'll hold this up for you. Just so that you can see, it automatically sort of creates a shadow because it's got that depth. And then I'm just going to use sort of something not too dark, maybe a pencil, just sort of a hanging, so that it's hanging from something. I may add something else yet, but we shall see. I want to add some shadows, but we'll do that shortly. Let's just place some of these back, because then I can actually think straight. I always find if I've got a lot of clutter everywhere, I can't actually think straight. I don't know whether you're the same, but I do like to have a little bit of a tidy up before I do anything else. So where's my, I want to do something at the top. So I'm going to add, where are you? It's going to be the last one. Can you see here? We've got the holly and the berries. I'm going to use the berry stamp. So I'm just going to use that berry stamp, not, you know, just sort of to give me some, like it grounds it, you know, like we ground things at the bottom, just so that it's got something it's dangling from. And I'm going to use the seedless preserves. I'm just going to go over with the seedless preserves, and then I'm going to touch with some candied apple, just here and there. And then I'm going to add very little sort of dabs of the mustard seed. Hopefully it will just touch it here and there. And then I'll spend 20 minutes deciding exactly where I want to put this. Not a good idea because I've got this in the way now. This is why you plan these out. And of course I haven't planned it out. So I want it. So I've just put it on a sort of a smaller acrylic block because that longer acrylic block was getting in my way and in the way of this here. So let's just add this here. And it just sort of grounds the top. And of course now I like it so much I want to add a couple more. Of course I do. So I'm going to add the seedless preserves, and normally you would go light to dark, but I'm just pushing it the other way a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of the candied apple and then little touches of the mustard seed that I can never remember the name of. So I'm going to add this there. And of course, when you plan a project, you would do that first, wouldn't you? You wouldn't do it like I'm doing because you flatten everything. So you wouldn't do it like I'm doing. You would do that first. But I only decided this at the last minute. So let's just do it again so we can have another little play. So again, seedless preserves, a touch of candied apple, and then a little touch of mustard seed. And then you faff like mad, like me. And you're going to flatten that little flower a little bit, but hey ho. There we go. Lovely, 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 lovely. Let's just tilt this up a bit. Poor flower. And just so that you can see, it's just sort of, look at, don't you love the berries, the way when you touch with the different colours? Don't they look lovely? Really lovely. Really love that. So I'm then going to add some touches of shading. And I've automatically, because it's lifted up, got a little bit of shading under my circular area here, just under the floral that's just trying to move constantly like you would expect it to when it's not dry. There we go. So let's just add the shading, preferably not with bright yellow. Still yellow. So you can see how much pigment is in the oxides. And obviously, if you're going on an area on your non-stick craft sheet that was covered in distress oxides, you just need to be aware of that. Just add a little bit of shading just around these areas here, just to give a little bit more depth. It just adds to give a little bit more depth. I'm then going to use my Posca pen just to add a few splatters of white where the colour is, because it just lifts that nicely, just so that you can see that. Just lifts it really nicely. And then I want some wording, and on the, let's bring this in, There it is. On the TE9, it's got take flight in the wording, so we will use that. Let's just peel this away and grab a smaller stamp set. A smaller acrylic block, not a smaller stamp set. A smaller acrylic block for the take flight. And now I'm going to stamp this in Nocturne ink so that it's foremost, uppermost. Let's just, and if I stamp this sort of against a straight piece of card, that helps you to sort of stamp straight-ish anyway. Let's just cut that out. I'm just going to cut this down so that it's not, the piece of card itself is not too bulky. There we go. And then I'm going to, I want to keep it in the cluster. So I quite like it across there. So we'll add it there so it just keeps the cluster. And Tracy will just keep shaking her glue until it comes out. So take flight, just wonderful. Just let that grab hold a while. While that just grabs hold, we will put those berries back. And now that just makes me want to do a Christmas card in them colours. Cleaning my hands and then just giving that a little bit of time for the adhesive just to grab hold, because I want to just add a little bit of shading just down here underneath the sentiment or wording. There we go, just makes it pop a little bit more. That's better. And if I just lift this up, I just love the sort of cluster, the composition. And again, you can add more touches of white, should you wish, to your little moth. You can just go in and add a few more touches of white, which obviously you would wait until everything was completely dry. You wouldn't try and do it like I'm trying to do it. So if we now add that to a piece of the black card to give me the matte, it just pops really nicely. So let's add the black, this to the black matte. So I'll add that to there. Sometimes if I stand up, I can see everything a little bit more clearly. Let's move these scissors out of the way. And then we'll add this to our 5x7 card blank. Which just makes it pop even more and frames it beautifully, like so. And then that is your card finished with some beautiful depth. Can you see those natural shadows? I just love that. I'm really pleased with that. Don't forget to add some touches of white if it's not showing up on your little pieces here. Go in and just add more white should you need it. you can add those touches of white. So we'll take one more look at the card, just so that you can see that. I always think if you see a card in video, you really can see all the details. So I hope you've enjoyed that and you'll give that a go. Love to all, and I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.